Welcome, everybody. I'm Brad Myers from the HCII Institute, and this is our seminar series for the spring. We have a great collection of speakers this year, and Laura Davish, my colleague, will introduce today's.
Thank you, Brad. So it's a great honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Denae Ford Robinson as our seminar speaker today. Denae is a senior researcher in the software analysis and intelligence team at Microsoft Research, and she's a self-described scientist of online programming communities. So I personally consider her a co-conspirator in bringing attention to and examining the social dynamics of software development communities and looking for ways to reduce barriers to participation, particularly as it relates to experiences of gamers and individuals underrepresented in programming communities. She has her PhD in computer science from NC State. In her PhD, she outlined a framework for how to use identity-based signals and e-mentorship to support engagement in online programming communities. And she's received the National GEM Consortium Fellowship, the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, and the Microsoft Research PhD Fellowship, so many awards. Her recent work has examined open source software development for social good, and the work she's going to talk about to us today, looking at the experiences working remotely during COVID-19. So I'll let Denae take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Laura and Brad. So thank you all so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be back, albeit virtually today. But today I'm going to talk a little bit more of a timely topic from what I've talked about previously. A ton of researchers at Microsoft Research have kind of formed these groups and to understand how software developers have been working in practice during the COVID-19 pandemic. So during this talk, I'll cover a brief background about working remotely before the pandemic, how people are engaging right now, and a little bit of some potential ideas for what we could see for remote work moving forward. So you all may be familiar with this quote I'm going to start off with. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. The season of light and the season of darkness. Spring of hope and the winter of despair. So this is the quote from Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. And throughout this talk, I'll be talking about the challenges people have faced, but also how they've been able to kind of find the benefits of those experiences, whether it be with their teams or with their family and children looking out the windows and balancing their work-life balance, rather their life-work balance, if you will. So first, I want to start off with covering some pre-COVID remote work and grounding it in experiences and research that's been done before the pandemic, understanding that several tech companies and DevOps companies like GitHub, GitLab, and Stack Overflow were all remote first. And for those of you who are familiar with my work, you know that I focus a lot on these developer communities. So we have a lot to learn from them. And there were also some interesting trends of how remote work and software developers were happening before. So in 2017, there was this survey conducted understanding how programmers are most likely to work from home. And in the purple line here, you'll see that that's the trend of computer scientists compared to all other fields such as management, people in home personal care, art and design, and finance. To gauge a better understanding of that here, you'll see the computer science trend of how programmers are working more frequently from home, as much as 6 hours worked from home a day, or ideally just throughout the week, right? And then compared to all other computer scientists or all other jobs. I point this out to say that there was already an increasing trend for the software developers, for the programming community. So I want to make sure that's very clear before diving deeper into this work. Likewise, before the pandemic, one of the organizations I mentioned, GitLab, actually created this remote work report. So they call themselves this, I think they would call themselves an all remote company. This before pandemic, where a lot of other companies were remote first. And they acknowledged that a lot of people who were working remotely, not just at their company, but they conducted a larger survey through a third party, and was able to identify that many would recommend people were satisfied with the tools of communication and helpful and thankful that their leadership gave them agency and the autonomy to work remotely. Similarly, there was a study that I conducted with my colleagues, Alexander Serebrennik and Reed Mousewitz, understanding the experiences of marginalized people who are working remotely, specifically trans developers, and understanding how the advantages that we're finding, the challenges that they face as well. And the main advantages I wanted to highlight here that we found from that work was that developers were talking about the control over the identity that they had and how it was shared. So this is for trans developers, so those going through different types of presentation experiences. Likewise, the flexibility of the economically stable work, as in anybody could work in tech, right? You had the ability to work on whatever products you wanted to and impact others, but still receive some monetary compensation of that. So that was the flexibility of that. Likewise, this autonomy to disengage or re-engage when they saw fit. So imagine maybe you have intersection or conflicts with your colleagues and you're like, you know what, I'm done with work today. I can just close my computer and move on. I have the control over who I want to talk with, who am I entertaining around the water cooler. So it's really interesting to see that these were main advantages before the pandemic, but we were curious, do these still hold? Before going any further, I want to make it very clear that the studies I talked about previously were about remote work. And what we're describing, or what we're going to be experiencing and talking about, is pandemic remote work. It's very different. There are a set of challenges that, again, this dichotomy of this work-life balance is really a life-work balance. And I'll be talking about a bunch of the studies that we conducted to be able to kind of make that very clear through research and empower developers in companies, and they can be used abroad as well. Okay, just want to put that out there. So the 3 studies I'll be talking about are this general pandemic work study that we did in March, so in the early days of the pandemic of last year, to be clear. Second, I'll talk about this remote onboarding and how new software engineers at a company have been able to describe the challenges they face, how they overcame social connections. And then third, team productivity. So understanding how the simple phrase of people asking, you know, how was your weekend and how are you able to, how was your day going, have now taken on new meanings of your ability to check in with the mental health of your colleagues. I'll start off with the pandemic work one. And all the papers that I'm going to be describing are publicly available, and there's preprint available on my website and also in the Microsoft's Work From Home Symposium and portal, which I'll show links to later as well. So the first one, general pandemic work. We went in with several research questions here. We wanted to understand how software engineers were reporting their self-productivity, how that changed. We wanted to understand the benefits that some engineers were experiencing, how these would affect productivity, and likewise, what does that look for the challenges they're facing? And finally, the research question 4 here was understanding the recommendations that we can probably make or that engineers would like to make to the organization. That actually did make a difference. So this study took a sequential mixed methods approach. So first I'm going to clear the timeline of when we distributed this survey and then when we distributed our second one. So we did 2 surveys for this study. The first one I want to indicate was that we started in March 4th is when we started working from home in the King County area. And this is King County of Washington State. For reminders for folks, that was where one of the first COVID cases was identified in Washington State in the Redmond area. And then from there, we started designing a survey immediately. It was a call to action, basically, and understanding what privacy and ethics reviews we need to do. And by the end of March, towards the end of March, we were able to distribute the first survey, which we were sent to over 5,000 full-time employees, including developers, program managers, and this one. And we included another survey with data scientists as well. So again, the survey questions here, including this first survey, were, you know, how has your productivity changed? What is good? What is bad? The challenges. These were all open-ended questions for the survey. So we received the 1,300 responses, over 1,300 responses, and then conducted identified a random sample of 400 responses and conducted some open coding. From there, we identified 32 codes, which we identified with over 80% agreement, and resolved them into 6 themes. And these themes were beyond work, as in the effects of work from home and non-work aspects, how that balance, like your proximity to family, your distribution of finances, access to food. Collaboration, which is the aspects of collaborative tasks of respondents, including the challenges with being creative, being blocked on others, and their range of interactions with their coworkers. The communication, understanding what's planned and what's ad hoc, what channels they're using, how long they last, how helpful that has been. Well-being, which is the response to the welfare of respondents, including their changes to their flexible schedule, location, effects from working from home, both on the physical, mental, and emotional health, as well as their personal comfort. And work responsive to their technical outputs, such as their productivity, the motivation, and the factors affecting focus and distraction. And finally, their work environments, the aspects of their work environment, such as ergonomically sound furniture, internet connectivity, satisfactory hardware, and even having a dedicated space, or even as much as having like a window that they can now look out if they didn't have before. So for this analysis of the survey, we identified those codes, and then we were able to put them into our second survey, which we distributed in early or late April. And from that survey, again, we focused on United States, or folks in the US population for the survey, with developers, program managers, and data scientists with over 2,200 responses. And we conducted the analysis using our Wilcoxon Mann-Whitney test, our Fisher's exacts, and did some lateral regression analysis to understand how the benefits and challenges experienced impact productivity. So the first result I'll cover is the productivity changes that we saw. And this kind of drives home the title of this talk, which is The Tale of Two Cities. The fact that there's a distribution between there are over about 30% of developers reported that their productivity stayed the same. But another about 30% reported that they're experiencing less productivity and even more productivity. And we kind of broke this down again. We sent this out through a couple of weeks, and this distribution persisted in that way. So again, there was quite a split between experiences people were having that we wanted to dive deeper into. So to get a better understanding of what some of those are, I'm going to first talk about some of the results from survey 1, where we qualitatively analyzed the benefits and what's good about working from home that participants described. One of the major ones, probably the most frequent one, was commutes, and how much that the reduction in commute improved other experiences, such as they feel like their health has improved because they're now getting more sleep and rest, and they're now in a more comfortable work environment. So it's interesting to see how that kind of influenced how they feel about their work. Likewise, the schedule flexibility, the autonomy to dictate your own schedule, take breaks when you want, prioritize your needs, your self-care in addition to your work. So respondents reported running errands, taking naps, exercising, and finally getting to connect with family and friends. Another one that was interesting on the schedule flexibility aspect was the fact that some participants didn't feel as constrained to work on the technical work. So this respondent goes on to say, I feel like I can solve problems more easily since I don't feel constrained by the clock. You know, I can cook dinner, I can check on the job results while I'm leaving something in the oven, and this balance that people now have time to do. Another is this focus and interruptions and distractions. So participants reported having less or more focused time and ability to kind of avoid the distractions of somebody walking over to your office in open office settings. So again, having a focused room, depending on what their work setting looks like, was a huge advantage here. A couple other benefits I wanted to highlight were the work environment. So several respondents acknowledged that their work environment at home was more quiet, more spacious. They received more sunlight, which is beautiful. We have in Seattle today, and close to the restrooms. So someone mentioned that, you know, I can now just walk over. My apartment is way less jewelry than the office. You know, I have the visual decorations that are not just about looking cool, but having a deep effect on how well and creative I feel and how long I think. Just being outside of the monotony of the environment that they were in previously in office, which was mentally draining and dropping their productivity. Likewise, a huge advantage for some respondents was the proximity to their family, the children, their pets, and their ability to take the breaks and be a part of those family experiences. So one participant went on to say, you know, being at home with family, especially with a toddler and baby, I get to spend a lot of time each day, every few hours, just to say hi or be around them, even if it's for just a few minutes. So participants were really thankful for that time and being able to get to see their family members grow up and spend time bonding with them. Likewise, we did have a lot of participants talk about how much money they were saving on gas and their commutes, and as well as being able to make homemade food. So next, I want to talk about some of the results from survey 2. So again, we use the codes from survey 1 to be able to put in our second survey and ask about prevalence of these tasks or prevalence of these benefits, as in, do you experience a benefit, which is that prevalence column there, and importance, as in, how important is it to you that you experience this benefit? And the distribution column shows the distribution skewing to the right, which is how many people experience this benefit. The delta column here indicates the difference between the average productivity change when a benefit was not experienced versus when it was. So you'll see here that all the benefits on the delta column have a positive digit, indicating that all benefits were indicative of supporting productivity when working from home. I do want to call out 2 of them, which is this less time spent on commute, which was the highest prevalence, which means most people, this is the most common benefit people experience. And then the better work-life balance, which is the most important, acknowledging that that most people identify that this was the most important benefit for me to experience. And the prevalence and importance columns here are in percentages. Should be clear about that. Likewise, we wanted to study the interactions between these benefits in a deeper way in conjunction with productivity. So here we conducted the lasso regression analysis, and I want to call out one finding specifically here is this combination of the less time spent on commute and more time to complete work. So respondents who reported both of those were also more likely to report that their productivity remained the same or increased. So it's important here to acknowledge that that combination of the less time on commute, they had more time to complete their work, and it was indicative of that. And others acknowledge as well, which are identified as significant with the asterisk, but I won't spend too much time there. The other one I wanted to highlight was the better focus time, which is one of our, from our qualitative analysis, was also resounding, as well as the less distractions or interruptions as influencing for increased or the same productivity. Next, I'll talk about some of the challenges from our survey 1. Some of these challenges participants experienced were centered around their connectivity. So one developer went on to talk about their VPN and the remote tools that they're experiencing are not that great and they crash often. Another thing is that they didn't want to enroll their Intune in their personal device. So within many companies, if you use your personal device, you need to make sure that they are securely on the network. And that sometimes is something that some respondents didn't want to do. So it was interesting to see about some of the technical challenge people are having just with the tools. Likewise, this dichotomy again of interacting with family, children, and pets. One respondent went on to say that staying focused, especially with young kids around, is a challenge. And normally they would only work a few hours after the kids went to bed. So we saw that people were expressing that they only had time to be productive in the wee hours of the evening. So their schedule flexibility looked a little different, but it was also not the best situation they would hope to be in. Likewise, some communication channels were a challenge. So respondents reported the simple questions and asking emails now taking 2 to 3 times as long as they did before, versus previously when you could just pop over to someone's office and ask, hey, can you help me with this? Now requires an online chat, a formal email, a formal event, right? Which made communication much slower. So some more challenges we experienced was the work environment that in the settings that people were not as effective, they're not as ergonomic. For example, one participant wanted to say that I did not own a desk and chair prior to the pandemic at home, and currently they're improvising at the dining table, as many have. So not sure if they want to invest or have space in the expensive office equipment. Is it valuable getting multiple screens when I don't have space at home to set those things up? So again, this was actually, there were several quotes like this that actually influenced some of the questions we asked later about improvements, which went on to kind of support how Microsoft is thinking about how to support people ergonomically and through their work settings when working from home. Another challenge folks described was this interruptions and distractions of always being online or only being online, which is it's hard to concentrate because every 5 seconds you're getting a ping on Teams or an email, which is the alternative to someone walking over to your office for a question. Likewise, it's hard to keep tabs on direct reports. So this person was a manager indicating that it's hard for them to even log what direct reports are doing, which can likewise create some challenges of, hey, as a direct report, is my work being acknowledged? Does my manager know what I'm working on? Is it going to be recognized when it comes time later on? Likewise, some healthy challenges or healthy habits took a hit for participants. So some folks had a rhythm of working out, doing daily bike rides, and now all they do is take 2 steps over from their toilet to the coffee machine. And that's their new workout routine that really took a hit for some folks. Likewise, this work-life balance combination with their new routine and getting in a new swing of things. So one participant went on to say, unless I impose a strict regimen, I feel like I'm working for hours, sometimes into the nights, and that line between that work-life balance is starting to get way more blurry. So for some folks in the other responses, participants described that commute was their way to kind of like decompress from the workday or get ready to engage in the workday. And that was their separation. Without that kind of threw some participants for a swing. So here in the challenges figure, I want to talk about from the responses from survey 2. Here, these challenges are ranked from highest prevalence, which is C1, to lowest prevalence, C20. I think I clicked a little early, but here you see that 83% identified that the highest perceived challenge was missing social interactions, and impact, which is about how impactful was the challenge to you, as in was it a major issue or was it a minor issue? Impact includes major issues though. And then the delta column indicates a difference between the average productivity change when a challenge was experienced versus when it was not. So here I highlight the C1, which is the highest experience challenge, and which is, yes, the highest experience challenge, and then poor ergonomics, which identifies as the most impactful challenge. So we found that all the challenges here, which you can see as indicated with the negative digits, shows that it was a lower reduction in productivity, like they were associated with lower productivity. And only 2, which are too many meetings and the fewer breaks, were not significant. So all but those. Likewise, we wanted to see and understand how these challenges were interacting deeply with productivity. So we conducted another lasso regression analysis here to be able to understand what relationships are. And comparing the lack of childcare challenge with the less time to complete work, we also noticed that those who said those responses were also less likely to report that their productivity remained the same or increased. So again, this is the fact that people who are experiencing that they don't have childcare and they are struggling with time to complete their work. They saw innately a decrease. Finally, to answer research question 4, we saw that, well, we asked participants to select 3 options from this list and as improvements they would like to see. So the all column here indicates the frequency of all respondents who suggested that improvement. The low column reflects those where they had a decrease in productivity, and the high column reflects when there's an increase in productivity. The asterisk denote the difference between the low and high at statistically significant levels. I'm going to call out 3 of them, which are S2, the improving connectivity and VPN dropouts. There was interest in having reimbursement, having a fast internet connection, and what it will look like if we did do something like that. Likewise, this providing ergonomic furniture. A lot of folks were interested in having a work setting that made sense for them. They reported having their standing desk previously in office. It would be great to be able to have that in home. Likewise, people were very interested in what it looked like to support remote work beyond these circumstances. That also echoes a lot of what I showed in the earlier related works from GitLab's surveys about how to help those who are interested in working remotely, but also how to encourage others to do that and at least be flexible around the idea. So what we're finding here from the benefits and challenges I discussed, you're seeing this yin and yang, right? This dichotomy of experiences related to focus, their autonomy, right? The work environment. It's great to be in the house by yourself so you can focus more, but then you're alone, you don't have the opportunity to engage with others, right? The meetings, this work-life balance. The largest one, or the one that I want to highlight the most right now, is the childcare needs. So respondents reported, those who reported they had children and no difficulty with childcare, they were less frequently to report a drop in productivity than the employees without children. Another here is that, however, the respondents with children who had difficulties handling childcare reported a 40% drop in productivity. So supporting those with the children and those experiences was an interesting result here, or an interesting question that I think still needs an answer, honestly. Respondents who previously had children in school or childcare were more likely to indicate that the major challenges they faced were lack of childcare, more interactions or more distractions and interruptions, less time to complete their work, and likewise, they were less likely to indicate the lack of motivation as a challenge. So since this study has been conducted, Microsoft and many organizations, I believe as well, have announced internal childcare responsibilities or extended work days and extended leave so you can be able to support your children during these times. So it's really exciting to see how these results and even the qualitative findings that we're finding here have been able to impact decisions later on about how we support folks. Now I'm going to talk about remote onboarding. So I talked about those who were trying in the general perspective of the pandemic, but now I want to focus on those who are new and what they're engaging in or how they're engaging and finding social interactions. So this work that I'm highlighting was submitted and accepted at HCII this year, and I have a preprint posted online. Dr. Paige Rogero from Clemson University led this work. So I encourage all to go check that out online. The question and why we even focused here is that being at a new company, starting a new job is already tough. You know, it's confusing. You don't know where to catch the shuttle. You don't know where the good cafeterias are. You're trying to figure out which friends or which of your colleagues can be your friends, which ones are gonna or make fun of you if you ask a silly question, for example, right? And now multiply that all on top of a pandemic, when your alleged mentors and managers who are here to support you, they're also managing their own challenges, right? They're also trying to get their own work from home setting set up and balance their childcare needs and more. But the question here is like, how are they interacting with their team? How, if at all, is social capital being built? Because we know that prior research has indicated that those relationships are important. to being effective for new hires, so keeping them, not just bringing them on, but retaining them. So the research questions we have here are kind of centered around the challenges that these new onboarded employees face. What are their teams doing to support them, which is RQ2. RQ3 is understanding how team members were interacting with them during the pandemic. And 4, what are the new hires doing to be socially connected, or how are they feeling socially connected? So this survey, if we started working from home in March, this one was distributed by July, where we submitted the survey to 1,000 full-time software engineers who started in the last 3 months. And then we wanted to gather their perspectives based on whether or not they were in industry, college hires, and more, because if we submitting the survey out in July means that the new employees we have from the last couple months started since the pandemic began, and they're coming from industry mostly. So following the university trend, students graduate in May or so, and that's when we have a lot of college hires. In January, in the new year, is when we have a lot more industry hires. So you see that we had 140 respondents from industry here. And here you can see the gender breakdown of those who reported their activity. Again, we have majority men, 57 women, 47 prefer not to disclose, and a whole lot of others who didn't even answer the question because it was a checkbox. And we have 1 identified as non-binary or gender diverse. So from our 267 responses, we were able to analyze the codes and actually conduct another open coding iterative session of that. And next I'll cover some of the challenges. So the main challenges, this is a list of the laundry list of challenges that people faced. So communication, collaboration, finding documentation, as in like, I know that this exists, my teammate told me to go check out this wiki, but where is it? Is it up to date? Most times not. There's also issues asking for help and technical issues as well. So for the community and collaboration one, this is a quote from one of our participants saying, during meetings, everybody's keeping their camera off, which is making it very hard to understand and connect with people and meet people and actually put a face to the name and just form those bonds. Not necessarily that everyone has to turn the camera on, because there are privacy concerns people are being mindful of. But from a new hire's perspective, that was their easy way to be able to form relationships and connect and really create that social presence. Likewise, folks also reported they had a challenge asking for help. So one participant went on this little rant, if you will, and described that, I've been getting enough, or I haven't been getting enough help for a specific task or on the task I'm working on. I lack the confidence that my work is actually doing what it's supposed to. In fact, they've had to scrap some things and start all over because there was some miscommunication, and now things are moving really slow, right? So that's not great for a new hire. And 61% of these new hires reported experiencing these challenges specific to COVID. With regards to onboarding efforts, we asked participants, again, what has the team done to make you feel connected? Where we had 67% of respondents reporting having a mentor. So some participants went on to say that, they constantly check in with their technical onboarding buddy or someone on their team, and they're intentionally giving them work so they can connect with other people on the team and form relationships that way. Likewise, someone else said that their onboarding buddy was very helpful, and they still go to them for questions as they come up, and really they're happy that they're there to be a resource and a tool for them throughout this experience. As far as team interactions are concerned, we asked participants, what does your typical daily informal and formal communication look like with your team? So 58% of respondents actually reported having one-on-one meetings with a teammate. Likewise, on average, we asked them how long do communications last, and over 72% of respondents described lasting 30 minutes, and 43% saying 15 minutes, indicating that it's just helpful to have opportunity to touch base. It doesn't have to be for a long time, but as a new person here, you just want to make sure that you're recognized, that your team knows you're still here doing work, and even you can connect with other new engineers as well, as one participant, S173, identified, and how valuable that can be. As far as social interactions, we did see that 83% of new hires reported having a social connection with their team. So one participant says, we have a weekly game night, and that's where they play online games together, and it's their highlight of the week, their favorite part. Another said they try to reach out to random team members and, per instruction from their manager, and Hannah asked them to ask their manager to put everyone to put on their camera so you can know who people are. Again, this is participants trying to identify opportunities for social connections or social presence anyway. We also saw experiences where participants described that they haven't taken the active steps. They kind of put the burden on themselves to be able to reach out to people, but they're spending most of their time ramping up and learning. But from this participant's experience, you can identify that, it's great to have that they're reaching out to people, but it's also great for others to reach out to them. But again, it's hard to require or have high expectations of that because everyone's experiencing their own challenge. But hopefully, luckily 83% of participants and new hires reported having some form of social connection, at least. So we provided some recommendations for remote onboarding as they permitted. And I think I want to highlight 3 of these that were kind of relative to what we see in other online communities, which are helpful. So of course, we set up by the scheduling one-on-ones and providing information, but this assignment of an onboarding buddy, and it can be a technical mentor and then organizational mentor, if you will, and how helpful that has been to some participants. We're actually in talks we were connecting with other folks around Microsoft to identify how we can kind of do this at scale. A lot of groups are doing it on their own. Likewise, assigning the new hire a simple first task, which is like equivalent to the good first issues you see on GitHub, right? Allowing them to get that sure first win so they can build up that confidence that, they belong here. They're going to be able to do amazing things here at Microsoft and more. So giving them that sure first win and those onboarding buddies would be probably the ones of these recommendations I would highlight the most, and hope you all are able to take those away. So now we're going to talk about team productivity. And this is the example of what I mentioned earlier of how that simple phrase of how was your weekend now takes a new effect. It's your opportunity to check in with your colleagues, right? See how they're doing. And our intern, Courtney Miller, led this work this summer, focusing on a couple of research questions. We had a huge amount here around the milestones, team culture, how their teams are supporting their members, and more. But the 2 research questions I want to focus on for the sake of time are the communication and collaboration and the factors associated with team productivity. So in this study, we used results, or we didn't use results. We used the survey 1, where we had asked questions about teams, and we distributed a second survey, and we received responses from 608 team members asking about how they interact with their colleagues. We use the factors from the cultural and team culture factors I mentioned before to build a model and reduce it to understand which ones were the most effective at contributing to their productivity as a team. And again, these are mostly all perceived productivity, as in how do you perceive your team is engaging. There I also indicate the gender distribution of these participants, but we didn't use that as a factor to contribute to team productivity. We used the cultural factors and the communication as well to be able to understand how people were engaging. So the factors that we identified for explaining team productivity here, I'm only going to highlight the ones that were significant. This less awareness of what colleagues are working on, the ability to impact or to make impactful contributions to their team was the most. Second group we have here is the external team bonding activities. Like, did your team have that? The ability to make decisions as a team, the difficulty communicating with colleagues, and starting those meetings with the non-work talk. So starting work meetings with, before you jumping in right into the technical depth, checking in with folks, how are they doing? Or ending meetings with that, just to really create those social bonds, if you will, with your team. The next group we have here is the frequency of scheduled social activities, which are also significant, as in, did your team have them? The ability to brainstorm with your team, as well as team members being supportive of new ideas, as in team members being open to hearing what others have to say, new perspectives they're bringing to the table, and more. So here on this slide, I'm covering the communication channels that people have been engaging with. I'm going to highlight 3 and how the communication methods have changed. So the first one I highlight is the communication ease with colleagues, where you can read this bar chart from the left, indicating the decrease and how that has changed. About the same, which is the purple indicator, and the green is the increase, as in, like, how's your communication increased? Here, for the communication of ease with colleagues, we've seen a huge decrease, as in, where's there reduction in friction? The second one I'll highlight is the ability to brainstorm with colleagues, which was very detrimental. So the brainstorming with colleagues, a lot of participants also reported that they missed being at the whiteboard. They tried using different tools like Mural and other virtual whiteboard settings, but it wasn't quite the same. It's something about being able to draw something and allowing people, your teammate, to come back up and grab the pen and add something to it in that really collaborative fashion that was missing. Likewise, we saw that as far as communication with the team, people felt very, didn't feel as socially connected with their team. They felt like that had decreased significantly. In the graph I have on the right there, you can see that we also compared this work from home survey, this was the pandemic work survey, of how people felt about their productivity in combination with those who felt about their team productivity. And it's comparable, right? But the fact is that's a whole nother percentage. Almost 50% of people don't feel like it's been changed or it has been the same. And I guess part of the point we're trying to highlight here that I want to drive home is that just understanding it from a productivity standpoint is not enough. There are several factors that are at play, and we should, continue to do work to understand that through a mixed methods approach. Next, I'll show some of these recommendations for team productivity. So we separated them out by what can improve communication and then what can support social connection. So as far as the communication standpoint, some of these I've already mentioned before, which are like the one-on-one meetings with your managers and managers trying to stay aware of their colleagues. But I think the most helpful one that I think people should draw from here is the creation of communication standards, as in what is the standard way we're going to let our teammates know that we're going to be offline? What's the standard way we're going to let others know that I'm available for you to ping me? Are we going to make sure we're actively using statuses? Or are we just going to change the color? Are we going to add text? Coming up with some standards for your team and at least your collaborators so that you're all on the same page gives a proper expectations that should be set so that everyone is clear on the same page so that there's no lack of conflicts later on in technical projects. For the improving social connections, the point I want to highlight here is the ability to include social activities as part of work. So again, this could be the 5 minutes or before or 5 minutes after a meeting, asking how people are, but it could also saying, hey, we're going to do an offsite where we're going to do like a paint and sip, and we're going to schedule it during the workday so it's a part of the experience, right? We're going to say that we value your life and fun stuff just as much as we value your technical work, and being intentional about that. So I hope that others take away from these team productivities, which can also be adapted to elsewhere, and not just for software developers. It can be adapted for research work settings, for your research lab, other collaborators as well. So I think the biggest question I've gotten so far when talking about this work is, what is the future of remote work? Not just remote pandemic work, because people are interested in what it looks like beyond. And I would say, I'll start off by saying that it's hybrid, right? It's going to be a mix of in-person. It's going to be a mix of people who come in the office and also come into their home settings. It's going to be a mix of people who are purely remote. There's so many varieties of hybrid work settings. And I think we're going to evolve to learn how to support those better. Likewise, it's going to be asynchronous. People are eventually going to understand that just because you pinged me on Slack right now doesn't mean you're going to get a response from me right this second either, right? And people are going to be able to understand that there are different time constraints and be able to empathize with the fact that people are going to be working in different settings, time zones, and trust that they will get to you when they're going to get to you. Likewise, there's going to be a series of remote work allies. You can consider these folks to be your remote work heroes. So when Dr. Pedro Gerald was here, she did a study understanding about what has been effective previously for remote workers internally. And one of the biggest ones that stood out here was the fact that although this person is remote, they had people in office serving as their remote work allies. So for example, I'm Tony and I'm working from home, and my manager's in a call and they're saying, oh, you know, or at a whiteboard with another colleague, and like, oh, I wish Tony was here to, you know, at least have this conversation with us. And an ally in the room will be able to say, hey, actually, we can bring Tony here. We can turn on the camera, we can rotate their camera to the whiteboard and allow them to be a part of this conversation. So that's what an ally is going to be able to do in remote work settings. We're going to see more of those. And we should encourage each other to be those people, to say, you know, let's at least reach out to them. Just because they're remote doesn't mean they're alone. And likewise, we're going to see it starting to continue to build around the other challenges in mind. We're going to be responsive to how people are engaging in the at home. There's people who may have health disabilities and health reasons why they're at home, even before COVID, and maybe even more so after the fact. We're going to be responsive to that. We're going to learn more. I believe we're going to learn more about how to support those people in those settings and allow them to do their best work. And this, again, this doesn't just fall on managers. This is colleagues, their coworkers doing the same. And the funny thing about all of this is that this is how open source already kind of works. But of course, we can take it further. So open source has always been centered around this hybrid setting, right? Asynchronous. You're not going to always know the colleagues that you're working with. You're not going to know what time zone they're in, but you are going to be able to. You're going to need to be able to be effective collaborators with them, and obviously build with their challenges in mind. Be responsive to them, and I think we can learn a lot from the open source community and how they've done this so far. And one example of, I think, of developers trying to help others and using their skills to help others is this open source for social good project. So I had my intern, Hugh Huang, working with me this summer, understanding how developers are using their technical skills to support others, not just other developers, which would be tech for tech. We're talking about skills for social good, tech for social good, where they're supporting community organizers, citizens, and more, and donating their skills, or sometimes being paid to be able to support those in that perspective. So I highlight 2 of these projects that we identified from our participants. And our interview participants, 2 of them were working on the COVID-19 related projects. So the one on the left is a COVID tracking project where some developers from our study identified that they were contributing and building these tools to support others. This one was probably by contract, but the one on the right, which is also responsive to specific regions and can be used on mobile devices, was the one a developer was really, really excited to contribute to, because this challenge went beyond their technical, the technical world. It went into the broader world. Everyone in the world could use these tools, and being able to contribute in that way was very fulfilling to these folks, and be able to contribute to a societal issue and help others. So I think we can learn a lot from social good projects, especially along the open source line, about how to do this effectively. And there are several other projects that included in this project, such as people developing tools for those in intimate partner violence relationships, developers developing tools to help identify safe restrooms in the San Francisco area for trans people. So there's a variety here, and the paper was also accepted at HCII this year, so it'll be showing up soon, and you will be doing that presentation, and the paper is available online on my website too. So I encourage you all to check that out. There are also other other researchers and contributors at Microsoft who have been able to contribute to how to support beyond software development, but anyone during the pandemic. And there's been these weekly future of work meetings where we come and talk about the research projects that we're working on, some centered around gaming, some centered around how those are engaging in meetings such as spotlight features to increase social presence. And I encourage you all to really check those out as a motivation to figure out how can I adapt my existing project and research that I'm doing to the broader scope of how to empower everyone. So as I'm coming to the end now, I want to revisit this quote about it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. As we recently reached the 500,000 marker of people who passed in the U.S. from COVID-19. And I think that really reminds people that it's not that this was or this happening to other people. It is happening to all of us, and it's happening right now, not just to the researchers, not to the developers, but global citizens. And I really want this to be like a charge. I want to really encourage us as researchers to know that we have a responsibility to empower citizens around the world. The research that we're doing, we should be able to pivot in studying the same populations that we've been studying for our research, but keep in mind that there are COVID-19 and pandemic responses that have shifted their project, and we should be able to empower them and leave them with more than just whatever we were doing before. We should be doing this before the pandemic as well, let me be clear, but I think it is a higher responsibility now, and our participants are counting on us. So with that, I want to thank all of my amazing collaborators who are at Microsoft and beyond, and of course, our amazing interns and visitors we had this summer working on these projects. And with that, I'll close and with these recommendations for how to empower others and to support team productivity through this best of times and this worst of times to help developers and others identify how their narrative fits in this tale of two cities. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Denae. So folks who have questions, you can go ahead and raise your hand or put it in the chat and I can read it out for you. So we have a question from Brad.
Yeah, one of the things that I was wondering is to what extent your methods of studying programmers had to change as a result of the pandemic. So kind of a meta question.
Yeah, this is a great question. So pre-pandemic, I was already doing a lot of remote studies. So in engaging with developers in online programming communities, a lot of the tools I was using before were Zoom for recordings, Teams now, even recording through Skype, right when Skype was a thing. So a lot of the pivoting that I had to do was mostly about, okay, we're going to ask these questions and get that background and create those relationships with participants, because we know that although I'm asking them about their open source experience, there are also other things, the underlying challenges that they're facing. So we always had a section, at least for the interviews portion of the open source for social good work, we had a whole separate section about COVID-19 specific challenges participants faced, how they were overcoming them, or how that may have influenced their work, because we don't want to probe, right? We want to be able to balance this this empathy of like, I want you to know that I care about your experience, but I want you to do it on your own terms, right? I want you to share with me what you feel comfortable doing. So I think I would encourage others to always have that background of like separate questions. And as that way, as your semi-structured interview goes in that direction, you're prepared and you're prepared to listen to what participants have to say.
Okay, we have a question from Mary.
So I had a question. I know it was kind of striking. I don't know if this is the distribution of like gender at Microsoft, but some of your surveys seem to have pretty low female or non-male responses. And I've been hearing a lot of like news stories about how the pandemic and needs of domestic work, child work, picking up the slack for lack of schools has had disproportionate impact on pushing women out of the workforce. And I wondered, do you have anything in your data that speaks to differences in gender?
Yeah, so the experiences with gender, I'm not sure if we included this in the survey as much, but we did ask for those, again, the gender of the people who are experiencing in the first study about childcare and more. The most prominent experience we had was the effects of childcare. And this is weird because, again, not every woman in America has children, right? And not every man in America has children either. But we did see the striking difference resembled there. We don't have data on how that persisted beyond. However, this is where the ability to have those follow-up interviews where people are more comfortable sharing those types of conversations, because again, this is so early in the pandemic, it was very unclear how different organizations were going to respond, how different data was going to be used, even were they just going to say these things to researchers so that, and they're going to an echo chamber, or was the company going to do something about it, right? So we don't have data on the retention of the participants because it was all anonymous surveys, but we do have the details of people saying that, I'm thankful for the time, I'm strained for the time, because a lot of the responsibilities are falling on many women, many men with children as well. And we're trying to figure out approaches to support them, so.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay.
I have a question. So I'm curious if there are things Microsoft is uniquely doing to support remote work that you've observed that you think are particularly effective, or just interesting that you've noticed.
Yeah, so I mentioned that we have these remote work meetings, like this virtual team where people from all different parts of the company, there's findings from GitHub about productivity increasing as far as pull requests. There's LinkedIn doing studies. There's people in HR, there's a whole bunch of those. And one of the conglomerate results, I think, that really resonated with the organization is that ergonomic support, for example, how to create a work setting at the very least that's effective. Like, do you have a stand for your desk to monitor? So that's one thing that Microsoft has done, empowering managers and empowering others across the organization to be able to have funds to devote to developing your work setting. So for example, I have a laptop stand. I was able to grab my laptop, my monitor from work, but I was able to get a dongle and grab some chairs temporarily from the workspace. But they also expanded there's a different portion we had for separate activities, like a personal benefits. There's now one for your work setting, and they included ergonomic desks as part of that. And from the previous studies that I had about pre-pandemic about remote work, such as when Stack Overflow was posting all these blogs way before the pandemic about remote settings, they outlined that these are like the basic necessities. If you're thinking about Maslow's triangle of what basic needs are, or pyramid of basic needs, having a setting that you feel safe in and you can feel productive in more important. So I'm glad that Microsoft really focused there. Another one that I mentioned a little earlier was the use for the childcare services, where you're now able to take extended time off that's not going to affect your other time off you have. So additional time to support your family and to support extended family members during this really challenging time, which I'm very thankful for.
Okay, Tianchi has a question.
So hi, Denae. Thanks a lot for your talk. It was really important and timely. So I noticed that both of these studies you conducted were directly targeting software developers, and I was thinking there are maybe other roles that are also also in Microsoft and developers need to interact with during this pandemic work. So I was wondering, and I noticed a lot of challenges like childcare and communication. Maybe that's also generic to other part of the team as well. So I was curious, was there anything speaks to the difference between different roles how different roles handling these challenges? And because developers maybe were more used to remote work before the pandemic, was that helping them in any sense to cope with these challenges?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that's why it was so interesting that we received so many that were based on primary needs. We kept it open on purpose, asking them what's good and what's bad. And we only asked developers, and they knew we were asking only them because we said what type of developer you are, et cetera. And the fact that they focused on these basic needs was also very striking. I think also part of your question was, what are the other factors that may have included, these sound kind of generic, or I guess they adapt to other developers or other collaborators that they're engaging with. The managers aspect, so there were other researchers in parts of Microsoft who were working on how to support managers. how they're keeping tabs on people. Again, this really does feel like more of the, okay, social communication. These are just basic challenges that people should have, but they're harder now. People are struggling more now. You would hope that because developers in general are already used to using DevOps tools and working in that matter, in those ways, it would be fine, but it wasn't. In fact, and sometimes it felt worse. So I think I want to definitely drive home the fact that this is not just remote work, this is pandemic remote work. And the shift of how people are working, even during a pandemic, even if they were working remotely before, is way more challenging. Because before, in remote work settings, you could work at a coffee shop. You still have colleagues, you could work at a co-working space where you still communicate with people, right? You still have in-person interactions, and you don't have that as much here in this setting. So good question, Tianchi.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Kristen.
Thanks for this talk. It's really cool to see this fleshed out in detail as it's something I've been curious about. I'm kind of having a hard time formulating my question, so I'm just going to give it a shot. And if you need me to clarify, this could be a bit more of a dialogue. It seemed like the challenges, when people self-reported challenges, that their impact was sort of muted compared to the benefits that people reported. I noticed like numbers seem to be more in the 50s as opposed to like the 80s and 90s that you saw with the benefits. And I'm wondering if that might be because people aren't very good at identifying their own challenges. And if you've thought about ways that we could study this in this kind of remote environment without necessarily relying on self-report.
Yes, so there's actually been a couple studies to do that exactly. So within Microsoft, there have been researchers studying how pull requests. So again, this is one of the factors people have used before in open source settings to identify how active projects are. Internally, the same thing. So we were looking at pull requests, or Chandra was looking at pull requests from the same time period, the same March onward time period in 2019. And once you control for the number of users, you're still seeing about only a 3% growth or 3 to 4% growth in how often pull requests are being opened and how they're being closed. And what this, if you only look at those numbers, you're saying, okay, everything is fine, right? And that's giving you a broader idea of how people are working. They seem to be working a little bit more. But when you only focus on those, you lose all the challenges and struggles people are having. And I think that's a big call to why it's important to have those mixed method studies. Likewise, on the GitHub side, this is also public. Nicole Forrestry at GitHub, she's their VP of research, put out a public report about how open source developers and private repositories had a lot more activity. Actually, on the weekends, they were actually having an hour more on the weekends and weekdays of people engaging through pull requests, comments, issues, and more, which made her worry. There's a larger worry about burnout, right? So people have the ability to flexible work schedule and they're working whenever they want. What does this mean for long-term interactions? So it's a big concern there. So again, if you're only looking at, okay, things are looking good, people are contributing that way, we're missing the bigger picture. So I think it's important, I'm glad you asked this question, that we combine a bunch of different metrics as well.
Okay, question from Pranav.
Hey, yeah, thanks for this talk. It is really informative. So I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm guessing you might have some more insights based on your work in open source communities. But when you're a newcomer to, let's say, Wikipedia or some open source community, a lot of times their values are very explicitly stated, right? So you know exactly what the values of this community is. And as an incomer, it's sort of easier for you to get a sense of how people are supposed to interact with each other, what meta norms exist. But when you're sort of a newcomer on a team at, let's say, a big org like Microsoft, or even as a new grad student in like a big department like the HCII, you're not exactly aware of what the norms are or what these values are. And a lot of times, a lot of this is implicit. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts in terms of, just improving social connection, if there's ways for teams to be more explicit about their values or their norms, and whether there's like alternate ways that those norms and values can manifest in an online setting. So let's say like if we were in person, every time someone submitted a paper, we had a small celebration or got cupcakes as a group just to celebrate that paper submission. What might this look like online? And what might that share about our values to newcomers?
This is a great question. This actually aligns with a lot of the work that I've been talking to with the GitHub. So there have been, what can I say? GitHub actually has been talking a lot about, or curious about exploring how do you give people recognition for non-code contributions, for example. In your example, Pranav, probably the code contribution would be the paper. That's a technical contribution. But how do you highlight people who are doing those activities? So in online communities like GitHub, on your profile page, there is a spider graph that indicates, how much of your time percentage-wise is included in issues or pull requests or comments. We're talking about adding a extended line to that spider graph around discussions, right? So now we're implicitly saying other things that are not as technical are also valuable, and we're celebrating those as well. So being able to showcase, if you want to get celebration, you want to encourage those types of behavior to make those norms explicit, you want to do it in a public center where everyone is going. So if you're talking about online, you have a celebration, or previously in person having a celebration, perhaps having things on the calendar around the time of paper deadlines, having a Zoom call where we're just celebrating the fact that it got submitted, because that's the win in itself. The fact that the paper got submitted. That's one example of having that. And it's potentially having that invite or setting that celebration coming up from someone senior, right? Because they're setting the tone. If someone senior identifies this is something we should be doing, others who are new to the organization, even PhD students, new faculty members as well, are going to say, okay, they think it's important, and I've already thought it was important, so now I feel more comfortable joining, versus someone who's junior setting these things up, trying to set norms when they're not already familiar with the community. They may not be as received. The norms that they're setting up, the celebrations that they're setting up, may not be as well received by others if they're not familiar with the community already. They don't know what's already going on. But if a senior person does it, you're more likely to listen and you're more likely to attend. So I think a lot of this work, we can compare, again, a lot of what's already happening in open source, we can learn a lot from, and we can figure out how to adapt for different settings. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Okay, great. So that's a great one to end on. So let's thank Denae for her time. And we're going to move to a conversation with the PhD students.